Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are embarking on a really fascinating literary investigation. We're going to uncover a massive secret that's been hiding in plain sight for literally over a century, right inside the pages of one of Brazil's greatest literary masters. We're looking at how history, societal assumptions, and honestly, just a few cleverly placed words can completely alter our entire understanding of a classic text. It's like a giant puzzle, and we finally have the missing piece. So think about this for a second. What if a classic love story was completely misunderstood for over 100 years? You know, when we pick up classic 19th century literature, we usually carry this unconscious assumption with us. We kind of just imagine a default identity for the protagonists. Typically, we picture them as white, navigating a predominantly white, European-centric world. But what happens when that assumption is entirely wrong? Well, it changes the tones, the colors, and the very values of the story.
Okay, let's dive into this. Take the absolutely brilliant 19th century Brazilian author Machado de Assis. He was a mulatto author deeply connected to the African diaspora in a country shaped by a vastly mixed-race society. Yet for decades, his legacy was subjected to this profound identity whitening. Critics and scholars essentially turned him into a Western Eurocentric icon. Because of this, readers grew awfully accustomed to just believing that this mixed-race author dealt exclusively with white characters. We put on these white-tinted glasses, and in doing so, we completely miss the incredible, subversive genius of his characterizations. Section 1. Clues in Plain Sight. So, we're zeroing in on a highly specific case study today, Machado's 1884 short story Noite de Almirante, or Admiral's Night. Now, for over a century, the unusual love triangle at the center of this story was debated without any racial inquiry whatsoever. But the clues are right there from the very first page. The story opens with this really specific introduction. Diolindo Venta Grande, it was an onboard nickname, left the Navy arsenal and walked down the street of Bragança. Machado introduces his main character immediately by name and, importantly, by nickname. The scholar Paula Dutra points out that Machado, who was an avid reader of Edgar Allan Poe, uses a brilliant literary artifice here. Much like Poe's famous tale The Purloined Letter, Machado hides his character's true nature exactly where we'd least expect to find it, audaciously right before our very eyes. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that the key to literally everything lies in that nickname, Venta Grande. For decades, critics endlessly analyzed Diolindo's interior thoughts, his jealousy, his despair, but they completely ignored his physical description. The word venta doesn't just mean a general nose, it specifically refers to the nostrils, so Venta Grande points to large nostrils. In the context of 19th century Brazil, this is a subtle but distinct physical trait broadly associated with Afro descendants. Even modern English translations have missed this detail. They simply translate it as big nose, which entirely erases the crucial racial implication Machado deliberately embedded in the text. Diolindo is, in fact, a black or mixed-race man.
And honestly, this single detail completely flips the script on the story's love triangle. As you can see here, every character carries a specific, historically grounded racial marker. We have Diolindo, the sailor, whose nickname reveals his black or mixed-race heritage. Then we have his lover, Genoveva, explicitly described in the text as a caboclina, a mixed-race woman of indigenous and European ancestry. Finally, there's José Diogo, the man who steals Genoveva's heart while Diolindo is away at sea. José Diogo is a farm peddler, which is an occupation that heavily implies European descent. To truly appreciate Machado's realism here, we just have to look at the historical data. Reading Diolindo as a black or mixed-race man perfectly aligns with 19th century Brazilian Navy demographics. As early as 1823, the maritime forces were completely mixed. Enslaved people were even offered up by their masters to enlist as sailors and cabin boys. These sailors were literally considered men of the second class. So Machado isn't just making up some random background. He's meticulously grounding Diolindo's social standing and racial identity in the very real, highly stratified society of 1880s Rio de Janeiro. Now let's talk about the unseen third point of this triangle, José Diogo. Historical records indicate that farm peddlers, or mascates, in the early 19th century were typically French, Jewish, or Italian immigrants. Afro-descendants were rarely, if ever, in this line of business. So by making José Diogo a peddler, Machado brings in the white European demographic. But here's the fascinating part. Machado relegates the white man to a place entirely outside the body of the narrative. José Diogo is the catalyst for all this drama, but he never actually appears in the story. It's a brilliant, ironic inversion of typical 19th century literature.
Section 2. Decoding the Love Triangle. All right, with the racial identities of the men established, we've got to shift our investigation to the female protagonist, Genoveva. Acknowledging her true racial identity is basically the skeleton key that unlocks the entire meaning of the story. When Diolindo returns from sea to find Genoveva with another man, he confronts her about the solemn vows of love she made before he left. Her response is famous. Well, yes, Diolindo, it was true when I swore it was true. For decades, traditional critics, viewing the story through a purely white Eurocentric lens, analyzed this line as a simple moral failing. They claimed she was naturally deceptive, or as one prominent critic argued, she was simply lying because she had lied enough in her life. They were judging her entirely by the standards of an upper-class white society. So that old chauvinist view essentially treated Genoveva as when she were this demure, white 19th century heroine who tragically failed strict upper-class moral codes. But the Afro-Brazilian reality is completely different. Genoveva is a caboclinha. In the intensely mixed race, patriarchal society of 19th century Brazil, a cabocla absolutely did not have the same moral obligations or restrictive models of conduct prescribed for white women of the elite. She is navigating survival and romance on her own terms. She possesses the capacity for choice, argumentation, and immense personal agency. Section 3. Removing white-tinted glasses. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why we need to synthesize our findings and look at the paradigm shift that happens next. So, when we actually put all these clues together, a massive paradigm shift occurs in how we read Machado de Assis. The biggest takeaway? Genoveva's actions are not a moral failing. When we acknowledge that she is a cabocla dating a low-ranking black sailor and then exchanging him for a white European peddler, the story stops being a simple, flat tale of romantic betrayal. It completely transforms into a realistic, incredibly nuanced reflection of 19th century interracial dynamics and power structures. If these characters were white, the readers of the 1880s would have been absolutely scandalized by a woman speaking so freely. But because of their racial identities, Machado is able to slip this deeply subversive portrayal of female agency right past his contemporary readers. It's exactly this kind of accessible, rigorous, open-access modern scholarship, like the incredible work by Paulo Dutra that we've been unpacking today, that finally lets us see Machado de Assis clearly. We don't have to discard the immense critical production of the past, right? But by embracing the Afro-Brazilian perspective, we can finally appreciate the unwhitewashed genius of Machado's characterizations. We see his keen eye for the social realities of his time, an eye that was sharper and, frankly, far more inclusive than history gave him credit for. Literature is like a mirror, right? But the reflection totally changes depending on the lens we use to look at it. Machado hid a complex story of race and class right before our eyes, knowing perfectly well that the biases of his readers would keep the secret safe. So the crucial point is this, and it leaves us with a really powerful, provocative thought to end on. What other classic stories change when we silently take off our white-tinted glasses? Keep that in mind the absolute next time you open a classic novel. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those tough questions and always keep looking beyond the surface. Catch you next time.